Thank you so much, Ms. Rennie, for that generous introduction. Really excited to be part of this interesting lineup of speakers for the 4-day international webinar. I'm grateful to the Department of Sociology and Center for Diaspora Studies at Kerala University for inviting me to this event, and particularly to the organizing secretary of this webinar and the director of the center, Dr. Jaykumar. Thank you very much. Thank you. It's indeed a pleasure. I really wish, as I said, I really wish this happens in Kerala in person so that I can be there with all of you. So today I'll be talking about what I have ideated as the publicness of the personal memories of the Malayali migrants, as it is noted in the expatriate and diaspora literature of Kerala. So this is more a conceptual study, I would say. And this is, even though, the study is placed in the very specific socio-cultural context of Kerala, but I'm sure this can be emulated in wider social context of other Indian states as well. For instance, when you think about northern states and the migration history, especially indentured labor migration history and the later migrations, there is this culture of Bidesiya songs. So, I'm sure, even though I'm going to talk more about Kerala and Kerala literature, migrant literature, but I'm sure this particular conversation is also significantly relevant to other areas, other regions of this country. This is actually a section of my ongoing research on Kerala migration from a very literary and cultural perspective. And actually, there is this interesting thought that has happened when I was doing this research, or when I start doing this research, thinking of doing something on the lines of Kerala migration. I sort of began with this question, that what are the alternate ways of studying the dynamics of human migration and understanding the complex yet very defining experiences of being a migrant. We all know that there are numerous studies, especially on the political economy of remittances to Kerala from the Gulf countries and elsewhere, from US, UK, Canada, wherever our people are there, and a few studies on the socio-psychological implications of migration, especially I would say during the 1990s onwards, as well as some recent studies on mostly from 2000s, studies on migration governance policies and processes. Even today now, especially during this COVID time, we often talk about the lack of data or limited data on migrants, due to which the governments are unable to formulate evidence-based policies for the welfare of the migrants. So these are some of the conversations that, especially academic conversation I'm referring to, that we are having at this point of time. But at the same time, what is intriguing for me is that, we can see that there are lesser academic studies on the literary cultural aspects of migration in understanding the sociality, emotionality, and experiences of Kerala's migration phenomenon. I mean, most of the time when we think about migration, when we talk about migration, when we articulate about migration, when we formulate policies on migration, something which, immediately comes to our mind is the economic side of it, or the economic aspect of it, and the livelihood as well as policy aspect of it. But what about sociality of migration? What about emotionality of migration? What about those rich experiences, not always easy experiences, but both, I would say, easy and difficult experiences of migrants from Kerala and all over the country, or all over the world, I would say. So what about those aspects? In the context of Kerala, this is particularly disappointing to see that there are lesser academic studies on, the socio-cultural or literary aspects of migration, considering the very long history of migration from the state to far and wide, all over the world, and particularly to the Gulf countries since 1970s, following the oil boom there. And also, we have to understand that there is a moderate existence of Pravasi Sahityam, as we call it in Malayalam, which is migrant literature in Kerala. There is a moderate existence of such migrant literature in Kerala at all the times, but especially since 1960s. So it is not something like, there are no text available, or there are not adequate text available for conducting studies on literary cultural aspect of migration. It's more like somehow we sort of sideline this whole conversation of subjective understanding of migration and focus more on the economics and livelihood as well as policy aspects of it. For the non-Malayali, non-Keralite audiences who are listening to me right now, to give you a context, for instance, the novel plots in this very famous writer Vilasini, his novel Niramulla Niralugal, which I can translate as Colored Shadows, published in 1965, and his another novel Avakashigal, The Inheritors. This was published in 1980. These novels were based on Malayali families in Singapore and Malaysia, where the author himself was a migrant for almost 24 years. So the publishing date was 65-80. And similarly, there is this brilliant short story by another very acclaimed writer, Kovilan, which is titled as Ormagal or Memories. And similarly, there is another writer, U.A. Khadar, and his memories, Ormagal the Pagoda, which can be translated as a pagoda of memories. These are all valuable accounts that portray the lives of settled Malayali communities in specifically in these cases, Southeast Asian countries. I think whenever we talk about Pravasi Sahityam, migrant literature in Kerala, we can't really miss M. Mukundhan, who is a very acclaimed writer, and his acclaimed novel Pravasam, which is migration. It is an important work depicting the Malayali migration to Burma, France, America, and the Gulf. So, my point is basically what I'm trying to say is there was always a moderate existence of literature that we should have studied in a much in-depth manner to understand, as I mentioned, the emotionality and the sociality of migration. However, the migrant literature received much popularity in Kerala in the later half of the 2000s with the publication of a novel, RDJ Rhythm, in 2008 by the then Bahrain-based writer Benjamin. This novel got translated to 8 languages. It has been translated to English by Dr. Joseph Koipalli as God Days. I'm sure some of you might have certainly read this book in translation, God Days. Penguin Books published it in 2012. And interestingly, in 2019, there was this 150th edition of the original Malayalam version was published. And that's in almost like 10 years time, this book has touched 150th edition. So I think it's very safe to say that no other migrant writing has received such an acclaim earlier in Kerala. And, when we look at Gote's, especially, the theme of it, we could see that it's loosely based on the real life story of an ex-expatriate Najib. And the novel is about the slave-like expatriate life and harsh and exploitative working conditions in Saudi Arabia that he has to face. And this is a very realistic expression of the hardships and deplorable conditions of many migrants, many South Asian migrants face in the Gulf countries. And this was a totally different narrative from the till then popular account of Gulf as the land of plenty and the modernism of its urbanity and high-rising buildings. Some change has happened to the public consciousness of the Kerala society with the publication of this book, and it was widely read, as I mentioned, 150th edition. So you could see the reach of this book, and it actually kind of forced us to think about what exactly is this Gulf dream and what is happening behind this Gulf dream. What is the reality of Gulf migration from Kerala? And something very interesting happened with, other than the society understanding about the harsh reality of migration, not only to the Gulf, but also to, I would say, the rest of the world. But also, something which was very interesting was that Kerala society began to show more understanding and compassion to the experiences of especially Gulf migrants. And the policy circles started addressing the issues associated with the exploitative kafala system, which is the sponsor-tied visa system existing in many of these GCC countries like never before. So that was, I would say, again, a great contribution of literature to what we call the social process of migration. But this is not the first time that the Kerala society got this shock, but I would say more second time that non-migrant Keralite got exposed to the reality and extent of suffering that many of Malayali blue-collar workers go through in the Gulf countries, especially in the Gulf countries. The earlier exposure was through a television program, Pravasa Logam in Kairali channel, in which, basically in that particular program, TV program, the families were interviewed, the families of trapped or missing migrants in the Gulf. They were interviewed, and later, some effort would be made to reunite the missing or the trapped person, migrant in the Gulf, with the family. So, while watching those, or while that was part of the larger, I would say, social consciousness of Kerala, but this God Days, the contribution was that there was a revival of migrant writing followed the instant success of God Days, and I could say that after God Days 2008. There was, Malayalam literature has witnessed publication of more than 50 migrant novels, significant number of poetry, a lot of short story collections, essays, autobiographies, biographies, memoirs, as well as a few travelogues by migrant writers. So, and also it's not just the migrant literature that God Days have contributed to, but we could see that there is a precipitated, in fact, this novel has precipitated a literary boom in contemporary Malayalam literature in the last decade. And something which I am really excited about is the presence and popularity of women migrant writers like Hani Bhaskaran, Shemi, Sonia Rafiq, Sabina Sali. It's really refreshing to see them having that limelight, and as well as acknowledged as mainstream writers, migrant writers, because most of the time, or until recently, the predominant and influential voice in the Malayali migrant literature was otherwise male. But the limitation here is, this migrant literature is actually limited to Kerala, accessible to those who can read Malayalam. Only a few of them got translated to English, as I mentioned, Benjamin's God Days, and another two of his novels, Al Arabian Novel Factory and Jasmine Days. They also is available in English. Also, there is this travelogue by very established, acclaimed writer Musafir Ahmad, which got translated to English, and the title of the book is Camels in the Sky, Travels in Arabia, which was published in 2018. So these are the books which got that, I would say, non-Malayali audience or readers, but otherwise not so much, not so many translations. And also, this is interesting to see that when I say very less number of translation, this is at a time when a lot of regional literature, I'm not talking about migrant literature, but regional literature, or I would say the works of mainstream Bhasha writers are getting translated to, especially English nowadays, thanks to Niyogi, Random House, and Westland publishers. They are all now into publishing regional language literature. So what would have happened if more translation of migrant work? Then with translation, a process of globalizing the local experiences would have occurred. But that is limited in the sense, it's still so much constrained within the Malayali readers, for that matter. Maybe one of the reasons could be, of less translation could be the questions of repetitiveness of the theme in the expatriate literature. Or we can think of, the lack of experimentation of forms, experimentation with forms in these writings. Or sometimes, questions about literary quality. And during my research, when I was doing several interviews with writers, they have hinted that there is a sort of, a hierarchy is existing among these so-called mainstream writers and the migrant writers in Malayalam literary domain. So they don't really want to identify themselves as migrant writers, which makes perfect sense to me as well. But yeah, this was the background just I wanted to provide to the non-Malayali audience here. But coming back to my point that there are only lesser academic studies on the literary cultural aspects of Kerala's migration phenomenon in understanding the experiences of migrants, it's very concerning from an academic point of view. And why I'm saying it's concerning is migration is a highly active socio-economic phenomenon, and it is impacting the Kerala society in a substantial manner. I mean, even as the theme of this webinar goes, I'm hopeful that we are all concerned about the turbulence in contemporary migration systems. And I'm optimistic that we are acknowledging the remarkable resilience of the migrant communities in home and host societies, and wherever, like, their respective diasporic spaces, wherever they are, especially during this difficult time of pandemic and the consequent job losses and wage theft scenarios the migrants are facing. I mean, at this point of time, I could say that what worries us is also the COVID-induced return migration from, especially from the Gulf countries and also from other places as well. And the questions of, the social reintegration of these returnees and their economic rehabilitation. So these questions are very active in the society. But the question which I would like to pose is, how are we trying to make sense of the experiences of migration, of migrants or diaspora communities or expatriates? Is it possible by looking only at the economic or policy-based academic studies, or do we have to broaden our understanding, our perspective and approach? If that is the case, then what are the alternate ways in which we can forge collective consciousness about migration and migrants, so that we can be more responsive towards their situations and their complex emotions? What are the possibilities that literature and art can offer us in this regard? So these are some of the questions that I really would like to pose to the listeners. I mean, let us look at the case of memoirs of the migrant writers. And I'm thinking of two categories of migrant writers here. One category, writing from the host societies, wherever they are, be it be Gulf or US or Canada or wherever they are writing from. Second category are those writers who are writing from Kerala post-return after spending substantial years of migration in these countries. And I can think of, or I would like to refer to the works of Musafir Ahmed, Babu Bharadwaj, Krishna Das, Benjamin, and the likes in this regard. So when we explore the memories of Kerala migrants and the returnees in the expatriate literature, especially, as I mentioned, memoirs, we realize that they can offer critical insights to the socio-cultural, political, emotional, and individual and personal context of migration, which are usually not found in academic studies. As I mentioned, academic studies have, or I would say, established majority. I'm not saying all academic studies, but majority of the academic studies is still having a much more policy-oriented focus that is tied to remittances, economics, and development. So, when we look at literature, when we study the literature, when we study the memories or the expression of memories in the literature, that's when we could actually see the non-economic context of migration, which is the socio-cultural, emotional context of migration. And then we all know that act of remembrance is central to the expatriate and diaspora existence of becoming and belonging in, this both home and host societies. That remembrance, memories, we call it nostalgia. That's very important. When you're not at your home, when I say homeland, you tend to think a lot about homeland. You start missing about homeland. We call it homesickness. Sometimes non-migrant Malayalis make fun of migrant memories as nostalgia, pretentious nostalgia, in fact. So, saying that, oh yeah, they are showing off. So, but then this act of remembrance is so central to the migrant experience. We can say that recollecting one's personal past is in that sense a very solitary act. It is the person who is recollecting his past, and when a writer does that, it's a very solitary act of memoir writing as well. So it's very personal, is what I'm trying to say. And when we look at the memories depicted in the memoirs or recorded in the memoirs, we could see that they were the conscious and unconscious recollection of autobiographical memories of events, maybe experiences from the writer's personal past that had occurred in several particular spatial, temporal, and emotional contexts. And when you read these books, you could see that the writer was in Oman, for instance, and he has traveled to the vast distances of deserts, and his experiences with each and every aspect of that desert, including that scorching heat and the camel and the ways of Bedouin life and everything. It's very personal account. It's a very autobiographical sort of account that we could see in these memoirs. And also, some of my interviews with these writers, and I sort of came up with this understanding that writing in many cases is a coping strategy for these writers. It provides maybe a feeling of existence and security, more like a pressure valve, I would say. And writing this literature provides the larger expatriate readers with a sense of familiarity, belongingness, and comfort. So the expatriate writer or the migrant writer is writing his own migration experiences, and the migrants who are reading it could immediately connect with it, because that's also their experiences. They have familiarity to the terrain which the writer is writing. And in that sense, there is always that sociality, which is, even when writing a very personal account, there is some element of sociality involved in it. And as I mentioned, for migrants, the act of remembrance is a very practical way of connecting on a very personal level with the homeland, which they have left at various points of time. This is more so in the case of Gulf migrants, since their migration is transitory in nation. We know that there is no possibility whatsoever of becoming permanent citizens of the Gulf countries. Rules are changing, policies are changing. Gulf countries started, offering long-term visas these days, golden visas, but then still it's not permanent citizenship, like maybe in the Western or the European countries. So there is that element of transitory temporariness in their migration. They know that at some point of time they have to be back in Kerala or in their home, villages and places. But then what happens is, when non-migrants read these memoirs, or more than reading these memoirs, the idea that this is just nostalgia. This is nothing. There is not much meaning to this act of remembrance. I think that's a wrong way to look at it, because when we look at it when we understand it from the perspective of migrants or migrant writers, we could see that this is a very crucial, critical act, social and political act for them. That they all these memorizations and even the feeling of nostalgia and homesickness. Now coming to the major theme of my conversation, the publicness of personal memories of migrants. How can personal memories be public memories? How is it even possible? Because as I mentioned, the writer is writing his own personal memories. When expatriate readers read it or migrant readers read it, yeah, they can connect it with, they can relate with the terrain and some of the commonalities of experiences. But how can Kerala as a society, as a sending society, can relate to it? How can, what is this whole process of personal memories getting translated to public memories, or how is memories getting that status of or layer of publicness is what is the question which I'm really interested to understand. And this is an ongoing study, so I'm still exploring is what I would really like to say. I would say there are majorly two ways in which we can identify the personal memories of migrants getting translated to collective or public memory of the larger society. Those two attributes are: one, the relatedness in the literature. Second is the repetitiveness of the narrative in the literature. I hope I'm not confusing you. Let me explain. Let's discuss this in the context of Gulf migration. So when I say the sense of relatedness, it's basically, as I mentioned, due to the reasonable commonalities in the migration experiences of the expatriates, be blue collar expatriates, be professional migrants from Kerala in the Gulf countries, and the non-migrant Malayali readers. They also relate to the text, because in Kerala, every family will have a member or a relative or a friend in the Gulf country. So it's not just the migrant readers who are connecting with the text, but also non-migrant Malayali society is connecting with the text as well, because of the presence of migrants in their family or friend circle. So that relatedness is happening there. Even I can even tell this from my own personal experiences. Many of my childhood memories are of my uncles and cousins coming from Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Ras Al Khaimah for their vacation. Spending time with them was really fun during my school days, and then the best was unpacking their suitcases. Oh, and the gifts they brought to me, like chocolates. There is something called in Malayalam we call pena pencil. I don't know whether it's available now, but pen pencil. It's more like a pen but pencil. Flashy pencil boxes and very fashionable dresses from the Gulf. I still remember me showing off to my school friends all these Gulf brought dresses of mine. So from the childhood, in that sense, most of the I would say the members of Kerala society are in that sense conditioned and familiar with this whole migration to Gulf phenomenon. And also, it's very interesting to see how much pressure is there for an average Malayali to migrate, not just to Gulf, but anywhere for work, and make it big like M.A. Yusuf Ali or Asad Mupan, or even like, that successful neighbor of yours who made fortune out of migration. So this is the relatedness that I'm talking about. You might not be a migrant, but you relate to the process of migration. You relate to the whole dynamics of migration from a very interpersonal level, is what is my point. And in that sense, as a society, Kerala can relate to an extent. I'm not saying fully, but to an extent, to the migrants that they when they read these memoirs or literature, especially the migrant literature. Second is the repetition of narratives. And then this is facilitated by, for instance, as Whitehead in his 2009 work mentioned, the historically conditioned memories. So in Kerala, we have these historically conditioned memories of early migrants, starting with the myth of Chairman Perumal, who is the king who migrated for the first time to the Gulf countries. He visited Mecca. He got converted to Islam. On his way back to Kerala, he passed away, I think in Salala, if I remember correctly. So it's there in the socio-cultural myth of Kerala. This whole the stories of migration. So there is these sort of historically conditioned memories of early migrants. Also, the memories of migrants who reach the Gulf shores on ships and those or patemari. There is a very popular film on the same name, Patemari. So and the stories of severe hardships they had to endure at that point of time in the hostile terrains of Arab lands. They had to struggle for survival in the hot, harsh, and very unfamiliar desert terrain of the Gulf, with bare minimum or at times with no facility at all, as it was also the formative years of Gulf's prosperity. So I'm talking about 1960s and 70s, when the very first mass migration from Kerala to Gulf that was happened. So that historically conditioned memories, which all of the, I would say, or most of the Kerala people knew about it. And even though this whole hardships of migrating to Gulf during 60s and 70s. When you look at the contemporary scenario, we could see that even though Gulf countries are now hosting almost 3 generations of Malayalis, the situation, especially for the blue collar class, that has not improved much. So the stories of average immigrant, for instance, are still of financial difficulties, getting cheated by deceptive recruitment agents, uncertainties related to the kafala temporary visa, exploitative and very what to say, precarious working conditions with no safety measures available. Recently, wage theft and inhuman treatments by the sponsors, living in overcrowded, very unhygienic labor camps or bachelor houses. So these are the stories which again, the Kerala society is familiar with. And there are also brighter side of these stories. It's not all about difficult experiences. There are brighter sides of these stories of improved standards of living conditions of families back in Kerala, and also the development that remittances have brought to Kerala, which is highlighted, as I mentioned earlier, which is very well highlighted in the academic literature, especially economic related literature, political economy studies in Kerala. So this repeated narrative of Gulf migration that every non-migrant and migrant Malayalis have exposed to and familiar with is helping to forge, sort of a bond so strong among the expatriate and non-migrant readers, where these personal memories of the writers attain some sort of a very distinct social meanings. So, the point I'm trying to make is the relatedness with the theme, familiarity with the theme, repetition of the narrative in the migrant experiences and memories since the early migration, that forge sort of a publicness in the personal memories of especially as we could see in the migrant literature in Kerala. So all of this, this understanding of the narrative get into the social psyche of Kerala. It is at this juncture that the personal memories of the writer transcend to the collective public memory of Malayalis or Kerala society. From then on, we could see that they are not private memories anymore. They are not private memories of Babu Bharadwaj anymore. It's not private memories of Benjamin or Musafir Ahmad anymore. It's the memory of the larger public and the readers, and they become then public memories or memories of publics, as Kendall Phillip has puts it. So the theoretical framework that I have used in this study is this Memories of Publics by, it's a 2004 work by Kendall Phillips. It's a very interesting work, in fact, and it actually gives us such insights of how expatriate memories have those, that publicness in its inherent manner. Something which I also would like to point out at this juncture is, sometimes in this expatriate literature or migrant literature, we could see that there are these non-personalized accounts of experiences and memories of fellow expatriates of the writer. So writer not only writes about his own experiences, sometimes he writes about a fellow migrant worker. He might have staying in the bachelor house or in the labor camp, or somebody who is working in his own office or the workspace. So he writes about them as well. He writes about their memories as well. So even in that sense, when we look at the literature, you could see that there again is a sociality, there again is a publicness, and a universal frame of reference is there. When we read some of these work, we could also see that these writers are in friends with other nationalities, those from Pakistan, Palestine, since especially we are talking about Gulf, so the West Asian politics have a larger impact on their migrant life in that sense. So they're friends with other nationalities as well. So that gives it not just an Indian frame of reference, but also a larger, I would say, universal frame of reference. And all of this together construct the publicness of personal memories. And, this get consolidated over time. It's a very gradual process. it gets consolidated over time in the larger social consciousness and the literature, and then this is sort of memorializing the expatriate memory, and getting into getting into a very authentic mainstream narrative. A very interesting term coined by Musafir Ahmad, by the way. He termed this whole process as Gulf lore, the Gulf Malayali folklore. So it's very interesting to see how personal memories, as expressed in these or as recorded in these literature, gets the form of public memories or collective memories. And why is it so significant? And that's my last point. Why is this significant? Is because we know that the mainstream historical narrative on migration is basically the historical or the stories of the most influential or the experiences of the influential, and that becomes the dominant historical narrative in most of the times. We know that our history, irrespective of which country and which era that we are talking about, we know that mainstream histories are very selective, exclusionary, and authoritative memorialization of the experiences of the influential, those in power. So there is a power relation, inherent power relation, or the authority that gets translated in the works of history. So you won't find much of the voices of marginalized in these mainstream histories. And I think that's why it's very important to listen to and record off-center narratives of the masses. And how can we do that? The best thing is look at the memoirs. Look at the literature. Have more ethnographic studies where we can record or preserve the memories of common people like you and me as very non-singular sites of public history. It is very important to memorialize and mainstream the personal experiences of migrants. And we know that what we have lost over time. For instance, there was those letters that migrants have sent in the initial time of Gulf migration. But yeah, again, letters are very personal. So maybe a researcher won't be getting access to the personal letter of husbands sent to their wives. Maybe that's very difficult to get access for an academic study. But we have some of the interesting materials available, like the letter songs or the kattu paatu. It shows the general nature of what those letters were like. So several of the things. My point is, we don't really record this history, and in the process, we are actually not just neglecting, but we are actually losing the major characteristics and features and the history of migration. It's a very large and significant part of history that we are missing out. So that is why it becomes very imperative that we should look at alternate ways to study the process of migration, and looking at literature is a great way to do that. And maybe just to mention, this is just coming to my mind. When you look at this whole publicness in the migrant literature is actually also forging a very subnational Malayali identity among the expatriates, especially. And why I'm saying this is actually I'm thinking about 2018 and 19 floods. Also the Nipah virus and the current COVID-19 pandemic. We could see that how much these migrant population have contributed to Indian, especially to the Chief Minister's Fund for Reconstruction after all of these, various 2018 or 19 floods, etc., etc. So that identity formation is also, especially subnational Malayali identity formation, is also sort of contributed by the texts or the literature and the larger personal memories getting translated to public memories. But something which is, you don't find much in this literature when you problematize these migrant literature, you could see that Usually there won't be much references of India or the narratives of national identity. As I mentioned, it's more about subnational Kerala identity. Because for most of the expatriates or migrants, their primary identity is basically their Kerala identity or Malayali identity. Also, one cannot find many references on West Asian politics or the socio-cultural lifestyles of native Arabs. One reason is, obviously the lesser interactions with Arab natives and also the strict political regimes of the Gulf. Recently, last year, 2021 November, there was this very interesting book published in English by Regimon Kuttapan. It's the title of the book is Undocumented, and it's about his experiences as a journalist in Oman, if I remember correctly. And then he was deported because of his proactive migrant activism. He was deported from those countries. So we know that in Gulf, in the West Asian scenario, at least context, there are these strict political regimes. Again, good example would be the same book that I have mentioned earlier, Gortes. When Benjamin published it, in 2008, the book was banned in UAE and Saudi Arabia. At that point of time, he was an engineer in Bahrain for almost, I think, 21 years. So when he decided to write a political novel, in fact, he wrote 2 novels. It's a twin novel on the West Asian politics. He actually shifted back to Kerala. He returned to Kerala. He returned in 2013. And that itself shows why there is not so much of West Asian politics in many of these expatriate literature from the Gulf, I would say. I think, so I think I made myself clear at this point, at least. So basically my argument is that, when the writer writes his personal memories, because of the relatedness, familiarity, and repetitiveness of the theme, the expatriate readers or migrant readers, as well as non-migrant readers of Kerala, they started connecting with the text and thereby the experiences of the migrants. Thus, private memories or individual personal memories get a meaning, social meaning of public memories, and that is what is the publicness of memories of migrants that I have sort of trying to ideate. With this, I'll end here. Thank you very much for listening.